Hello, my name is Raquel Sojourner, and I'd like to welcome you to San Diego Mesa College's resume workshop. I'm hoping that today you can learn some great tips and tricks to help your resume stand out. So let's go ahead and get started. So today's objectives are for you to hopefully learn some strategies on how to tailor your resume, how to identify the components of a well-tailored resume, and to how to make yourself stand out through your resume. So let's talk about what is a resume. So a resume is really a brief sales marketing tool for you to help your employer to see what makes you the right person for the job. So you want to make sure that you are summarizing your education, your background, and your experience and connecting how that qualifies you for the position and how that connects you to the company or organization that you're applying for. And you're also wanting to make sure that you're using this as a way to get your foot in the door. So you want to make sure that the employer is not wanting to file your resume, but to hire you and really want to at least bring you in for an interview. So how do you prepare to write your resume? You want to make sure that you go ahead and look at the job description and read it thoroughly from top to bottom. You want to understand the qualifications and skills that are related to the job that you need to make sure you include in your resume to show that you're a fit for the position. And then you need to make sure that you identify the best resume format depending on the skills and experiences that you have and your work history. And we're going to go over what those three resume formats are. So the three options that you have are going to be a chronological resume, a functional resume, or a combination resume. The first option, which is a chronological resume, is really the most commonly used. This is what you're probably most familiar with when you think of preparing a resume, and this is really what most people tend to create for a resume, even though it may not always be the best option for everyone. How to know whether this is the best option for you would really be in order for you to emphasize your career growth, your experience in an industry, as well as showing that you have a strong job-related background. This isn't always ideal for someone who has a lack of job history, any kind of changes in your career, or possibly a spotty work history. So you can usually choose another resume format if that's the case for you. So the next resume format would be a functional resume. And this is a resume format that is best suited when you're de-emphasizing your employment history. So this resume format actually focuses more on your transferable skills and qualities that you can relate to the job description from past experiences. And you can utilize this for large gaps in employment, if you don't have any work experience within your industry, or if you have a pattern of short-term jobs. So it is really good if you do have some type of volunteering experience, internships, academic projects that are related to the work that you're wanting to go into, or even if you have paid work that may not necessarily be related to that industry. So you can see, for example, within this resume that this person chose research and clinical experience, customer and client service, as well as leadership experience as three skill sets that they have or have built within their experiences in other jobs and other volunteer experiences that they wanted to bring into their resume to show that they still have these qualifications that can apply to the job. The last resume format is going to be a combination resume, and this is really, like it implies, a combination of both the functional and the chronological. So you can still stress skills and abilities or capabilities that you have related to the job, but if you wanted to add specific positions, employers, and dates to the resume, then you can actually include both of those as a way to emphasize your experience. So you can see in this example that the person chose their technical experience and professional experience, where they're drawing from academics as well as internship and a volunteer experience as a way to show that they're qualified for this position. And this can be a great way to show to a potential employer where and when you've gained your skills that you're highlighting. So those are really the three formats that you can choose from. And within those formats, you also want to make sure that you are specifically including certain formatting components. And we're going to go over what those include. But you do want to make sure that you pay attention to your format, and some of these may vary depending on what specific format you chose. One of them that is always going to be there is going to be your resume header. And this includes your first name, last name, home address, phone number, email address. Personal website could be an option if you have it or if it's related to your industry, but isn't always going to be required or necessary. Secondly, you can include an objective statement, which is optional. You always want to make sure that you include a strong objective statement if you're going to have one at all. So you want to make sure it shows what you have to offer and relate it specifically to that particular job or career field. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. So in a less effective objective, you could say something like, I'm seeking an entry-level position within my chosen field of personnel work. This is something that is very vague and you could use for tons of jobs, and that's not going to stick out to an employer. But if you choose something more effective, like seeking a challenging position as a technical recruiter, offering skills in interviewing, occupational assessment, and employee supervision, that's something that is very specific to the position that you're applying for and the specific skills that you're bringing to that position. And that's going to stick out so much more to an employer right off the bat, knowing what you're bringing to the table. So that would be an example of a strong objective statement that you would want to include in your resume. In terms of education, this is always something you want to make sure to include if you are currently in college. Within education, you want to make sure to include the school or college, university that you're attending, the location, as well as your major. You also want to put in your actual or expected graduation date. If you have any related coursework or class projects that are related to the industry or the job, you can definitely include those as well. And if you have a GPA that's 3.0 or above, that's also something that you can definitely include that's going to stick out to an employer. If it's anything below that, you don't need to include your GPA. It's not necessary. As far as high school information, you can include that, but I would recommend only doing that if it's been within the last 2 years of college. Otherwise, it's not going to really be that relevant and is kind of a waste of space. In terms of your experience, you just want to make sure that you do include a specific position. If you are choosing to do that based on your format, you want to include your job title, employer, city and state, as well as your dates of employment. Then you're going to want to include within your position descriptions your duties and tasks that you had within that experience. So you're describing any responsibilities, skills, or accomplishments that you had, and you want to make sure you put those in about 3 to 5 bullet points. Nothing more than that, and you don't want to necessarily do less than 3. But you want to make sure that you start these bullet points with action verbs. So for example, on this resume, you can see this person included action verbs such as escorted, provided, managed, facilitate, design. So those are all strong words that are going to start off your description of your duties in a very action forward way, and that is going to stick out to an employer. And just make sure you realize that any of these experiences that you put down or positions that you include does not just have to be paid work. This can also be work that's related to volunteer service or community service. And that's still just as relevant a lot of times as paid work. You also want to make sure to include your keywords from your job description, and that's why it's so important for you to go through that before you even really get started in tailoring your resume. So you want to make sure that you're picking out specific skill sets in relation to your experience that are touching upon the keywords or key skill sets that you see within that job description. Some other things that could be very much related to the job or helpful in making you stand out would be foreign language skills. So if you speak a second language, you definitely want to make sure to include that. Or even if you speak a third or fourth language, any languages that you speak are going to be a unique skill set that you're bringing to the table. So don't leave those out. Computer software skills, so any computer skills that you have, even if it's just with Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, and Excel, you definitely want to include that as well, because you never know if you have coworkers that may not be as familiar with technology as you are, and your employer is going to want to know that they're not going to need to train you on certain programs, that you're going to be able to do them or navigate them on your own. And then lastly, laboratory or technical skills would also be something that you would want to include on a resume in order to make sure that an employer, if it's related to the industry, knows that you're capable of doing the tasks that are required for the job. Some other optional headings that you can include would be related coursework, depending on whether or not that coursework is related to the position. So if you have specific course titles that you feel would make you stand out or show a specific skill set, you definitely want to include that in the resume. You can include any academic projects, any honors or awards, community service, study abroad experiences, clubs or associations that you may have been a part of, or any additional leadership experiences that you've had. And all of those you want to make sure are related to the position if you're going to put them on your resume. Things that you do not want to include would be possibly your age or date of birth. That usually is not going to be relevant to any position, so you don't need to put your birth date or age on your resume. Specific addresses of former employers are not considered formal or appropriate, so you don't need to include that. I statements, you don't want to start any of your sentences with I. You always want to make sure you start them with those action verbs, and that's really important for resumes. Specific dates are also not necessary. You wouldn't put May 5th, 2016. Instead, you would put May 2016. So specific days are rarely ever considered necessary. And then lastly, you don't necessarily need to include references available upon request. That's kind of an outdated thing that maybe your parents or grandparents used to put on their resume. If employers are looking for your references, then they will let you know. And it is very important for you to have your references ready to submit, and definitely make sure you contact those references beforehand to give them a heads up that someone may be calling them regarding a reference for you, but you don't necessarily need to include them on a resume. That's going to take up way too much space, and it's really just not necessary. Some other formatting details to remember would be that recruiters are really only spending an average of 6 seconds initially reviewing your resume. So you want to make sure that you keep your resume to 1 page maximum. You definitely do not need to have 2 pages unless you have at least 10 or more years of experience within your industry. Keep it to an 8.5 by 11 size paper. Stick to a traditional font. Arial, Times New Roman, Calibri are all going to be traditional and acceptable fonts. You don't need to get those, fancy cursive ones or the silly ones that you see. That's not really going to be appropriate for a resume. Keep your font size to between 10 to 12. And always make sure you check your verb tenses. When it comes to grammar, that's huge for resumes. You do not want to have any kind of grammar errors, so make sure that your verb tenses are consistent. Anything that you did in the past, you're going to be using past tense, and anything in the present, you're going to be using present tense for all of your verbs. So just remember that. Make sure that you're using margins and spacing so that you're organizing the content so that it's easy to read for your employer. You don't want things too pushed together or not enough space for them to actually see the differences between your resume sections. And you also want to make sure to not, bend, fold, or manipulate your resume in any way that's going to make it look messy or not neat. So you definitely want to have a crisp and clean resume, especially if you're submitting it hard copy or bringing it in for an interview. And something to not forget